China should accept President Lai Ching-te's olive branch. That's what Taiwan says after Beijing slams his National Day speech. Two shocking accidents put workplace safety back in the spotlight. Florida begins cleaning up after Hurricane Milton leaves mass flooding and destruction in its wake. Plus,
it's been a year since Typhoon Koinu brought record-breaking winds and widespread destruction to this small Taiwanese island. For many people here, it's been a long, painful road to recovery.
good evening and welcome to TaiwanPlus News. I'm Eric Gao. Thanks for joining us. China has slammed Taiwan's President Lai Ching-te for comments that he made in his National Day address on Thursday, prompting reactions from both Taipei and Washington. Reese Ayers is following this story for us from Taipei. Reese, another angry response from Beijing. What are they saying?
Yeah, more of the usual rhetoric, Eric. China reasserting their claims of sovereignty over Taiwan, all in response to comments that President Lai made during his National Day speech, where he said that China and Taiwan are not subordinate to each other. China's foreign ministry responded, saying that Lai Ching-te has deliberately severed the historical connection between the two sides, and also saying that he's selling a fallacy of Taiwanese independence, and then accusing him of having sinister intentions of increasing cross-strait tensions for his own political gain. Now, the Taiwanese side, the foreign ministry, quickly responded to China by saying that China should understand the goodwill expressed by the president in his speech and face the reality of cross-strait relations. And this afternoon, Washington also chiming into the conversation by saying that they don't want to speculate on how China might respond to Lai's speech, referring there to some perhaps some military responses, but saying that there is no justification for a military response to what's essentially just a routine annual celebration, urging Beijing to act with restraint. Now, folks are saying that Lai's speech during that National Day celebration was actually more conciliatory than they were expecting, some calling it moderate, and some saying it was kind of an olive branch to China, one which Beijing is refusing to take.
Has China responded with more than words so far? There were concerns that China could launch some big military drills around Taiwan after Lai's speech.
No significant military response just yet. To its early days, there were some ADIZ incursions last night. Taiwan doesn't own that airspace, but it is used as a kind of buffer zone, but nothing too surprising. There's some anticipation that over the weekend there may be some bigger drills, though where and if and how those happen is anybody's best guess. Beijing could respond in a more indirect way, perhaps by doing things they've done before, such as increasing tariffs or restrictions on Taiwanese imports to China, or even by pressuring their own allies to up the pressure on Taiwan by doing things, for example, like restricting access to their countries to Taiwanese passport holders. But as of now, Lai's less confrontational tone in that speech hasn't yet prompted any dramatic response from Beijing.
Thanks for that, Reese. That was Reese Ayers live for us in Taipei on China's response to President Lai's National Day speech. Now, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, he has expressed concern about China's actions at sea.
We remain concerned about China's increasingly dangerous and unlawful actions in the South and East China Seas, which have injured people and harmed vessels from ASEAN nations, and contradict commitments to peaceful resolution of disputes.
Speaking at the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN Summit, Blinken said that China's actions in the disputed waters are putting more pressure on regional allies. He said the U.S. will continue to support freedom of navigation and overflight in the Indo-Pacific. The ASEAN Summit is taking place in Vientiane, Laos. Blinken also said the U.S. remains committed to protecting stability in the Taiwan Strait. 22 people have been killed in Israel's latest round of airstrikes on Lebanon. 117 others were wounded when 2 residential areas and UN peacekeeping locations in Beirut were hit. It is the deadliest attack in Lebanon in over a year. And it's the 3rd time that Israel has launched airstrikes on this particular suburb, saying that they are targeting Hezbollah commanders there. The attack has drawn widespread criticism.
So, as I said, it's very concerning because the parties have an obligation to respect and protect our peacekeepers. And what happened is also a violation of 1701, but also a violation of international humanitarian law.
Now, UN Resolution 1701 was passed in 2006, and it was supposed to end hostilities between Israel and Hezbollah in Lebanon. Small town saw 2 factory accidents just an hour apart. Inspectors have shut the plants down, putting a new focus on the state of workplace safety rules here in Taiwan. John Van Trieste reports.
It was shortly after 9 on Thursday morning when Ms. Huang fell into this trash compactor, killing her. She'd worked for over a decade at this recycling plant in the Yunlin County town of Doliu. The conveyor belt had gotten stuck, and all she'd done was check to make sure the machine wasn't broken. By the time the plant's owner realized something was wrong, it was too late. In addition to shocked family members, workplace safety inspectors were soon at the scene.
是调查的结果由治安署中区治安中心这边去负责停工及采罚处分。那我们县府也会做后续的有关职灾的一个为助的一个事宜。
In the same town, barely an hour later, an Indonesian migrant worker was nearly buried alive at this cement factory. They'd gone down to work in a deep rock pit when a conveyor belt above that had gotten stuck suddenly started moving again, bringing an avalanche of stone. Thanks to a safety harness they were wearing, firefighters were able to rescue this worker, but it was a close call.
可能是潮湿啊，或什么样卡住，它的一个外劳一个印尼的外劳，他就绑个带子，绑安全带，下去拿圆锹去敲，你在下面一敲的话，那上面就崩了嘛。
Both factories broke an important work safety rule by not shutting off malfunctioning conveyor belts. They've both been shut down and fined a little over $9,000 US. But how to stop accidents like this in the first place? It's an especially tough question where migrant workers are concerned. NGO Global Workers Organization Taiwan says they are 2.5 times more likely to suffer a workplace accident than their Taiwanese counterparts. And small or medium-sized companies are where these accidents are most likely to happen due to lack of proper procedures.
当事情发生的时候，不要说我会处理它，你需要跟着你的 SOP 来走。那就是给个例子，就是大多数的移工或者是工人，他们都会倾向于我自己去处理这些事情。就是如果有机器发生问题，我会自己去处理问题。但是大多数的 SOP 的话，会是说他们需要把它停机。
This and proper safety training, as mandated by the government, are what this group believes are the best ways of overcoming Taiwan's work safety problem, a problem these 2 accidents have thrown back into public attention. James Lin and John Van Trieste for TaiwanPlus.
Survivors of Hurricane Milton in the southeastern United States are asking what's next as they begin a painful and difficult cleanup. For some of them, fulfilling their basic needs remains their first priority. Bryn Thomas reports.
Gerald Gilchrist wades into the flooded street that runs through his battered neighborhood. The 77-year-old Floridian rode out Hurricane Milton, unsure of what would happen to him and his home, but determined to stick it out.
Well, it was an experience that only thing I got left in my life. If it was going to go, I was going to go too. So I was trying to protect it, But if I had to do it again, I don't think I would. Matter of fact, during the storm, I thought about that, that I made a bad decision.
Still, this is the worst storm he's seen in 11 years in this state, and other long-term residents of his hurricane-prone region agree. At the Atlanta Motor Speedway in neighboring Georgia, over a dozen Florida families are waiting until it's safe to go home. In any previous storm, including Helene just 2 weeks ago, Michael Clem wouldn't have considered evacuating, much less fleeing the state. But this hurricane was unlike anything he'd ever seen.
None of the other storms. I've been there for 36 years in the same area. Never once have I been scared. Like, I gotta get up and go. Maybe go to a little bit safer location, higher elevation, because there were some times I lived on the water. But for the most part, it was just stay where I'm at, I'm good. This is the first one in 35 years that I was scared of.
The families here are relieved their homes seem to have escaped serious damage. But not everyone is so lucky. Crystal Coleman's house was one of those destroyed by the many tornadoes the hurricane spawned. For her, the shock of a loss is coupled with an uncertain future.
I need somewhere to stay at. I need somewhere to lay my head, me and my daughter. I need clothing. My clothes is destroyed. Everything inside of my house is destroyed.
The U.S. government is working on a response. President Joe Biden even suggested Congress come back from recess to speed up recovery. But on the ground in Florida, many who made it through the storm are still in survival mode. Chris Ma, John Von Trieste, and Bryn Thomas for TaiwanPlus.
And life has not yet returned to normal for residents of Taiwan's Orchid Island, 1 year after Typhoon Koinu ripped across the island community, flattening buildings and knocking out power and communications. Rick Loud reports.
Ushering in a new start with an old tradition. Villagers set off in teams from Taiwan's Orchid Island. The first race since a deadly typhoon struck here 1 year ago.
那刚好我们去年经历了一个很严重的小犬台风，那这台风几乎让整个岛都摧毁掉。那我觉得今天很开心，可以看到大家好像有一种复原的感觉。
因为我们6个镇都在一起，很热闹，有跳舞的，有滑冰板做的，有卖东西的，什么都有，所以今天很开心，又是看到很久没有看到的朋友，所以很开心。
This time last year, life on Orchid Island was disrupted when Typhoon Koinu brought record-high winds of more than 200 kilometers per hour, knocking out electricity, communications and transport links, cutting off this isolated island community home to the indigenous Daya. For centuries, the Daya people have marked the changing seasons with traditional canoe races like this. It's a chance for the whole island to come together and celebrate their unique seafaring heritage and culture. This year, it's also proof that life must go on despite the hardships. And although this is a joyous occasion, many islanders are still struggling to return to normalcy. Orchid Island's 5,000 residents rely on traditional farming, fishing and tourism to get by. For the last year, the island's main road, connecting villages around the coast, has been a construction site. Repairing typhoon damage and moving electric cables underground to avoid power outages in the future is making slow progress. Materials and manpower must be shipped in from Taiwan's main island.
中央已经讲很久，那是因应小犬台风之后，大家才来重视。但是我们希望厂商们或者台电那边、台电端那边能够按照进程来去执行，因为如果说再拖延的话，会影响到乡亲的生计。
Accustomed to relying on themselves, many Daya have rebuilt homes and businesses on their own. They say their needs, particularly at a time of crisis, are not always understood by the national administration in Taipei. Many island residents are still struggling against bureaucracy to get disaster subsidies. Central government paperwork doesn't quite match the reality of life here.
这里是公共猪舍嘛，那个台风的时候就把这边就吹掉。
For one, this village hasn't managed to secure the funds to fix their pig yard, caught in a grey area between private and public property.
在很多你说像节日或是记忆里面都会需要杀猪嘛，你落成需要杀猪，那你的猪要养，你要把它养得很大，然后没有猪，你等于是你好像缺少了一个部分，就是身为达悟人，你没有养猪是这样子。
These traditions, unique to the Daya, keep them connected to their environment. At one with their island, over the last year, the Daya have repaired or replaced half of the boats damaged by Typhoon Koinu, a labour of love and meticulous craftsmanship. These vessels, now showing their mettle for the first time, a display of indigenous tenacity in the face of the wind and the waves. Luffy Lee, Peachy Drung and Rick Lowett on Orchid Island for TaiwanPlus.
Coming up after the break, how sophisticated cybercrime gangs are making more money than ever across Asia, and why law enforcement just can't keep up.
For more stories from Taiwan and around the world, download the TaiwanPlus app.
In the face of adversity, the power of truth.
A roadmap for a just and open world, charted by the freest country in Asia.
Taipei for TaiwanPlus.
TaiwanPlus News, a voice of freedom in Asia.
Welcome back. You're watching TaiwanPlus News. Taiwan's Vice President Bi-khim Hsiao has joined forces with Olympic boxing champion Lin Yu-ting to inspire the next generation of women leaders. Hsiao tells us more.
On International Day of the Girl, dozens of people have gathered here in Taipei to meet some of Taiwan's top women leaders, including Vice President Bi-khim Hsiao and Olympic gold medalist Lin Yu-ting. Hsiao telling the crowd how Taiwanese women have demonstrated incredible leadership potential that is critical for the future, especially for Taiwan.
就是韧性，就是我们能屈能伸，我们碰到困境，我们被打压，但是在该有爆发力的时刻，我们是能够展现自己的 power， 这就是一种台湾的精神。那我相信也是很多女性在从事各个专业领域，在各行各业都需要面对的。
Today's event, called Being Dazzling, is organized by Taiwan's Ministry of Education to encourage women to pursue their goals, despite the challenges they may face. A goal highlighted by Olympic boxer Lin Yu-ting in her address.
无论外界如何评价，我们都有改变自己的命运的勇气以及力量。最后，勇敢不是天生的，而是来自于每一次面对挑战的选择。
Speakers here may come from very different backgrounds and fields, but there's one thing they all have in common. They're among the best at what they do. And they all have a clear message. Women need to be and deserve to be leadership, not just here in Taiwan, but around the world. Justin Wu, Jeffrey Chen, and Hurrell Hughes in Taipei for TaiwanPlus.
Authorities in Indonesia have arrested a Chinese suspect sought by Beijing for his involvement in an investment scam. Immigration detained the man in Bali after biometric data flagged him as wanted in China. He was traveling on a Turkish passport at the time. The 39-year-old was allegedly involved in a $14 billion investment scam. Indonesian immigration is investigating whether he is really a Turkish citizen before moving ahead with his extradition. Transnational organized crime is growing faster than ever across Southeast Asia, and it's become such a big problem that law enforcement agencies can't keep up. According to a new UN report, crime groups are using online scams to make billions of dollars. The report says that in 2023 alone, between 18 and 37 billion US dollars was scammed out of victims across both East Asia and Southeast Asia. Cyber fraud has grown so big, it has taken on industrial-sized proportions, with criminal groups often operating under the guise of industrial or science and technology parks or as casinos or hotels. The groups are also incredibly sophisticated, using new technologies like generative AI. Deepfake-related crimes are also skyrocketing. Now, to learn more about these huge cyber-enabled fraud groups, Alec McDonald spoke to Joshua James, the Regional Counter-Cybercrime Coordinator for the United Nations.
How do these criminal groups operate at such a significant scale that they're able to steal 18 to 30 billion US dollars in South and East Asia alone last year?
These groups are using technologies that have been built to allow normal business to scale massively. Now, on the back of that advancement in technology and the ability to reach audiences around the world that, for example, social media loves, these criminal groups also had the backing of established money laundering channels and a long history of already being able to channel and flow a lot of money across borders, basically through things like drugs trade. They've done a lot, like we mentioned, with casinos. So that infrastructure was already in place to be able to move massive amounts of money via traditional kind of organized crime groups.
So one of the factors in this is the people that are operating the scams. Your report suggests that many of these people are actually human trafficked and being illegally detained. Can you speak to the scale of the human trafficking going on here? And also, where do these victims come from?
Let's just say that the problem is massive, and specifically because, again, of economic opportunities and people looking for jobs especially. So getting online, looking for a job that sounds too good to be true, and then eventually you go across borders, and that's kind of how the trafficking begins, is looking for legitimate job opportunities. In terms of who is let's say, most commonly trafficked, it really depends on the scam centers. It depends on the organized groups behind it. It depends on who they're targeting.
The report discusses how these fraud operations, these cyber-enabled fraud operations, are becoming so advanced that law enforcement is really having a difficult time keeping pace with them. Can you discuss a little bit about what law enforcement and NGOs can do to catch up to these fraud groups?
So, criminal justice process still fits in that. We have to be much more agile and quick about how that process works. So there's some steps we can take there, just speeding up the way that criminal justice works in every country. NGOs fit in the picture by basically filling the gaps and helping identify, for example, what's happening online, because law enforcement, if they're doing investigations, that's after the event has already happened. NGOs' role would be pre-incident, to try a lot more on the prevention side, I would say. But really, if we want to address this, I mean, it's a global problem. Criminal groups, transnational organized crime groups, are not thinking about countries. They're not thinking about borders. So we have to readjust the way that we think about international cooperation.
That was Joshua James, the UN Regional Counter-Cybercrime Coordinator. Acclaimed author Han Kang has become the first person from South Korea to win the Nobel Prize for Literature. The novelist is known for works that confront South Korea's historical trauma. The Nobel Committee praised her poetic and experimental style and called her an innovator in contemporary prose. Han previously won the Man Booker International Prize for her novel, The Vegetarian. Customers at a bookstore in Seoul were delighted with Han's win, seeing it as a statement in a country where the literary scene has traditionally been dominated by men.
우리 한국의 역사 누구나 다루기 어려운 그런 예민한 부분을 문학 작품으로 이렇게 승화시켜서 세계적으로 우뚝 솟으셨다는 것에 대해서 너무나 자랑스럽습니다.
That was Lee Soo-young, a writer from Seoul, commenting on Han Kang's Nobel Literature win. The Matsu Islands are repurposing and renovating cultural treasures, not just to bring in more visitors, but also to preserve local memories that are starting to fade. John Ventrias has the story.
Cultural worker Wang Hua-ti guides a tour group through a tea house that once gave military officers and their men a place to relax on a tough assignment. Through the Cold War, the Matsu Islands, just off China's east coast, were part of Taiwan's first line of defense against communist invasion. And in Wang's own lifetime, these islands were a world apart, only coming out of isolation and martial law in 1992. These days, the islands have transformed into a tourism magnet, but Wang is part of a movement to preserve memories of how things used to be and to keep alive a special island fortress identity.
我们有一个很强烈的一种世代的那个记忆的断裂。我的这一辈，我们的这一辈跟我的上一辈，他经历过这样的一个整个过程战地的这个背景的流程。但是我的下一代，如果尤其是在1992年后出生的这一些孩子，他对他来讲，那个年代是跟他来非常遥远。
This isn't an easy task. There are a lot of now abandoned sites to protect. Here on the island of Nangan alone, there are 95 coastal defense batteries. Until recently, efforts to repurpose them were unregulated and full of failures. But the years since 2018 have seen a more sensitive approach, with help from the Culture Ministry. These days, a coalition of architects, artists, and concerned locals discusses what's to be done with old sites and installs public art inspired by them to enhance visibility. One conservation success story is Site 26, a project by architect Zhang Zhengyu. Her modifications to the site won her an architectural award earlier in the year. Since first visiting Mazu in 2017, she's become deeply involved in thinking about how to present the island's heritage to newcomers.
在设计的时候，我们的确是有意图的，想要把人在这个动线的过程当中慢下步来，然后透过这个框洞去看到，你跟村庄的关系。
For local cultural officials, these projects are a way of reclaiming agency on a group of islands whose story has long been shaped by the winds of change from the outside world.
我非常希望从战地转移下来是一个艺术岛。我们一直被环境、被政策、被政治，而产生一个样子。那个样子其实从来都不是马祖自己。那么，什么才是真的马祖呢？
And while not everyone appreciates some of the more artistic aims of the program with its new artworks alongside old monuments, islanders are always happy to see more visitors, an important source of income and vitality.
还 OK 吧，我觉得至少它的背后也有马祖2个字，然后对啊，然后就是说让那个区块的游客变多，游客变多了以后，其实让地方也就活络起来了。那我觉得这是非常正面的，这是非常好的。
With many of these refurbishment projects and art installations finished in recent years, there's plenty to see, both for first-time visitors and even for locals. New ways to explore a very special group of islands. Fu Huaheng and John Van Trieste for TaiwanPlus.
Thanks for watching TaiwanPlus News. Before we go, check out scenes from a new stage musical in New York City based off the hugely popular Japanese manga Attack on Titan. I'm Eric Gao. Take care. Have a great weekend.